Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. It's Coach Cece here, and today is going to be the very first episode of the Rotation Playbook series I'm going to be starting on this channel. In this series, we're going to go over the ins and outs of what volleyball rotations are and how to leverage them so that you can be successful on your volleyball team. This first video is going to be all about just rotation basics, what a 5-1 is, what a 6-2 is, and just what rotations even are. Before we get into it, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode in this series. Also, make sure to comment down below any rotation-specific questions that you have, and I'll make sure to answer them in the next videos. But without further ado, let's get into the video. So obviously we have to start with a question of what even are volleyball rotations. Basically, volleyball rotations are the movement of the players on the court that is required of the players based on the rules of the game. In volleyball, there are 6 people on the court, and every time you win a rally and you gain back the serve, your team has to rotate in a clockwise fashion. There are certain rules that you have to understand about rotations and certain key terms that I'm going to be using throughout this series, so I'm going to go over those first. First rule of rotations is that you have to follow the rotation order or you will get called as out of rotation. That will ensue a penalty and give a point to the other team. You have to maintain your rotational order during a serve, but once the ball is served and is in play, players can move about freely and go back to their original position. So that brings up the key terms of base position and home position. Home position is going to be the location on the court that you have to be in during a specific rotation. So whether you're in rotations 1, 2, 3, etc., your home position is going to change based on what rotation you are in. Versus your base position is going to be the location on the court that your position is always going to be in during a round. For example purposes, a middle blocker's base position is always going to be middle front, outside's front row base position is always going to be left front, and a right side's base position in front row is always going to be right front. I'll go into that a little bit more in detail later on in this episode. The basic to remember about rotations is who your opposite is on the court. So no matter what rotation you are in, if you don't know where to be, all you have to do is find your opposite and it's going to guide you in the right direction of where you need to be in that rotation. So for our opposites, our OH1 and our OH2 are always going to be opposites. Our setter and our right side are always going to be opposites, and then our middles or our middle/libero are always going to be opposites as well. So as you'll see as we go through the rest of this video, no matter what rotation we are in, when we're in our home position, you're always going to see that those opposites are opposite of each other. Now in this video specifically, I'm going to be talking about serve-receive rotations. There are different ways that you can set up in each serve-receive rotation, and again, I'm going to get into those in this episode. Other important key terms to know are 6-2, 5-1, and 4-2. These are going to be different offensive rotations that some teams will use. So in a 6-2, you're going to have 6 hitters and 2 setters, and then in a 5-1, you're going to have 5 hitters and 1 setter, and then in a 4-2, you're going to have 4 hitters and 2 setters. There are definitely pros and cons to each rotation, and we're going to get into a little bit more about what those pros and cons are. Regardless of whether your team is running a 5-1, a 6-2, or a 4-2, there's always going to be 6 rotations that your team will go through because there are 6 zones on the court, and that's going to complete the clockwise rotation of your team. Now let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of a 6-2 versus a 5-1, which are the 2 most commonly used offensive systems. Pros of a 6-2 is you're always going to have 3 front row hitters. This allows for a lot of different offensive options because you have all 3 of your hitters. Versus in a 5-1, there are 3 rotations where you only have 2 front row hitters. It also allows for a more balanced rotation because you're always going to have strong attackers in the front row and strong defenders in the back row. Typically, teams will use this if they have really strong setters, or they have front row hitters that maybe aren't as strong in the back row. Or maybe you're going up against a team that also has strong hitters and you want to have a strong line of defense at the front row. Some cons of a 6-2 is that it does require more substitutions. Because you have 2 setters and 3 front row hitters at all time, once you get to a certain rotation, you have to do a double substitution that allows a new setter and a new right side to come in. That's 2 substitutions right off the bat that you have to do every time you get to that rotation. The other con is because the setter is in the back row, they might be taken out of the offense because they have to play defense first. So if the setter has to play defense first, that forces another player to take that second ball, which if that player is not as skilled as the setter with taking that second ball can lead to some issues with the offense. Let's talk about a 5-1. 5-1, there are going to be 3 rotations where the setter is going to be in the front row, which can lead to just different offensive options. As the setter is in the front row, that means that there is no right side hitter, and that allows the middle blocker to run behind the setter and do different hits like a slide or a back one. Because the setter is front row, this also allows them to attack at the front row, so this can lead to things like setter dumps, which can be a very effective offensive attack. And obviously, contrary to a 6-2, there are less substitutions with a 5-1. Sometimes you might see teams use a defensive specialist when their right side goes back row to gain just more defensive strength because usually the right side is not as strong at defense as a defensive specialist. Now, contrary to a 6-2, with a 5-1, there's only going to be 2 front row hitters during certain rotation. Once you get to rotations 4, 5, and 6, the setter is going to be front row. That means they are technically going to be the right side hitter. That means your only actual front row hitters are going to be your middle blocker and your outside. Again, this just creates a different offensive dynamic where the middle has the option to run behind and the setter also has the option of setting the outside in the back row. A lot of different offensive options that you can use during a 5-1. And that's something that we will get into a little bit later in this series when we talk about what's going to be the best plays in each rotation. In this video, we're going to be talking about what the most commonly used serve receive formations are. This is going to be for a 6-2 and for a 5-1. First three serve receive formations for both a 6-2 and a 5-1 are going to be the exact same. So just keep that in mind as we're going through these first three rotations. First, let's go over the home positions for serve receive rotation 1. Serve receive rotation 1, the setter is going to start right back, and then in right front, you're going to have your OH1. In middle front, you're going to have your middle blocker 1. In left front, you're going to have your right side 1. And then in left back, you're going to have your OH2. And in middle back, you're going to have your middle blocker 2 / your libero. Another important rotation rule to know is the overlapping rules. Overlapping rule is that whether you are front row or back row, you have to stay in your rotation position. It means if your rotation position is middle back, you have to be between who is in right back and who is in left back. Once we go over these serve receive formations, we'll go over a little bit more how those overlapping rules apply. There are also overlapping rules with front row and back row, meaning the front row players always have to be in front of the back row players. At any time during your serve receive formations, you don't follow these overlapping rules, you'll be called as out of rotation and the point will go to the other team. Now, there are a couple different ways that you can set up in serve receive rotation 1, but this is going to be the standard that most teams will use. Which one is going to pull back because they are going to be a stronger passer and we don't want the setter to be in line of the serve. We want the setter to be able to release so that they can be a setter. So your three passers are going to be your OH1, your libero, and your OH2. Again, here the overlapping rules apply. Since OH1 is front row and the setter is back row, OH1 has to be in front of the setter. Same thing for OH1 and OH2. OH1 is front row, they have to be slightly in front of OH2. Now, it doesn't need to be a drastic difference. Since you are in serve receive, you want to have generally kind of your players in a straight line, but OH2 does have to be slightly behind OH1. And same with the libero, they have to be behind OH1. And then your middle blocker and your right side are just going to pull back slightly so that they can help with any of the short serves. And once the ball is passed, OH1 will release to hit on the right side for one rotation, the right side will hit on the outside for one rotation, and the middle will hit in the middle. And sometimes teams will have their two pins stay for one rotation, or they'll have the outs and the right side switched so that they are playing in their normal base positions once the ball goes back over the net. So that's going to be rotation 1. Now let's look at what rotation 2 home position is going to look like. So everybody has rotated one position clockwise. So now our OH1 is going to be left back, our setter is going to be middle back, a libero is going to be left back, OH2 is now in the front row in left front, right side 1 is now going to be in middle front, and the middle is now going to be in right front. Again, these are their home positions, so this is not where they're going to play during the rally, but this is where they have to start at the beginning of the serve in order to be in rotation, and once that ball's in play, everybody can go back to their base position. So let's go over what the serve receive formation will look like in rotation 2. Here you can see the setter and the right side are pushed up to the net. Now this might look a little bit weird because the setter is back row, but this is technically still a legal serve receive formation because the setter is behind the right side, so the setter is still technically back row. The middle is going to be pushed a little bit to the right side of the court. OH1 is still going to be in right back passing, the libero is going to be in middle back passing, and then OH2 is going to pull back so that they can pass and serve receive as well. Again, this is going to be the most commonly used serve receive 2 rotation because it puts your strongest passers in the best place to pass. Once the ball is passed, OH2 is going to shift out to the left side of the court so they can hit. The middle blocker is going to come around so that they can hit in the middle, and the right side is going to release to the right side so that they can hit on the right side. This puts the setter in the best possible position because they don't have to move as much in serve receive, so it makes running an offense a little bit easier. Then again, once that ball goes back over the net in the rally, everybody is back into their base position, so the setter will go back to right back, the libero will go to left back, and the OH in the back row is going to play middle back. Now again, depending on how your team runs your defense, some teams will have the libero in middle back, and some teams will have their outside in left back, but for the purpose of this video, libero is always going to be left back base, and the outside in the back row is going to be in the middle back base. Another overlapping rule that you can see here is because the setter is technically middle back, they have to be between the libero and the OH that is passing. And again, the overlapping rules apply for our passers as well. Since the OH2 is now front row, they have to be slightly in front of the libero and the OH that is in the back row. So that is going to be rotation 2 serve receive. Now let's look at what rotation 3 is going to look like. So again, everybody has rotated clockwise one position. Now we have a new middle. Since libero cannot play front row, we're going to swap in a new middle, and depending on who the libero is serving for, the middle 1 is going to serve and the libero will switch right away after we lose the rally, or the libero is going to serve in this rotation. So here in our home position for rotation 3, we have libero in right back, we have OH1 in middle back, we have the setter in left back, a new middle in left front, OH2 is in middle front, and our right side is in right front. So this is going to be rotation 3 home positions for each position. Now let's look at what the serve receive formation formation will look like in rotation 3. Now again, this is going to be the typical setup that you will see in rotation 3. There are a lot of other different formations that you will use, but we will get into that later on in this series. So again, our goal in serve receive is to 1, put our strongest passers in the back row, and 2, to put our setter in the best possible position for them to release to their setter base to make running our offense a little bit easier. So again, we can see the setter is pushed up to the net with the middle blocker. We pull our OH2 back to pass. Again, your outsides are usually going to be your stronger passers compared to some of your other hitters. We have our OH2, our OH1, and our libero passing. Our right side is pulled back slightly to get some of the shorter balls. And again, our setter is pushed up to the net to be a little bit closer to their setter base. Again, our overlapping rules apply. Since the middle is in left front, they have to be on the left side of all the other front row players. Pretty easy to do in this rotation. The OH2 was already middle front and the right side is already right front. Same overlapping rules apply for our back row players. Since the setter is in left back, they have to be on the left side of all the other back row players, which is our libero and our OH1. Typically, you're going to have your outside passing rather than your right side because in most situations, your OH2 is going to be a stronger passer than your right side. Again, once that ball is passed, the OH2 is going to release to the left side of the court so that they can be a hitter. The middle is going to release to the middle of the court so that they can be a hitter. And the right side is going to release to the right side so that they can be a hitter. The setter is going to release to the setter base so that they can run their offense. In videos to come, we're going to do a deep dive into each rotation and how you can use different serve receive formations to best suit your team and to best side out in each rotation. But now we're going to move into rotations 4, 5, and 6, and this is where the biggest differences will come into between a 6-2 and a 5-1 when it comes to serve receive. So for rotations 4, 5, and 6 for a 6-2, they're going to be the exact same as rotations 1, 2, and 3. Rotation 4 is going to look the same as rotation 1, rotation 5 is going to look the same as rotation 2, and rotation 6 is going to look the same as rotation 3. The only difference is you're going to have a new setter, a new right side, and a new middle in those other 3 rotations. So once we get to serve receive rotation 4 in a 6-2, that's usually when a double substitution will happen. A new setter is going to come in for our right side, and a new right side is going to come in for our setter. When we get to rotation 4, the right side is now coming back row, and the setter is now coming front row. With the double substitution, we're going to have a new right side come in for the setter that is now front row, so that now we again have 3 hitters. And a new setter is going to come in for the right side that just went back row, so we have a new setter in the back row. This is where the 6-2 comes into play because we have our 6 hitters, OH1, OH2, middle blocker 1, middle blocker 2, right side 1, right side 2. And then we have our 2 setters, S1 and S2. We already talked about when the new middles come in when we rotate to rotation 3. So here's some side-by-sides of what rotations 1, 2, and 3, and 4, 5, and 6 look like for a 6-2. As you can see, they're pretty much exactly the same, just with the different players swapped. First, let's go over the home positions for rotation 4 in a 5-1. So again, everybody has rotated 1 position clockwise, and now the setter is in the front row. And our right side is now in the back row. Now, on some teams, you'll see a substitution where a DS or defensive specialist will come in for the right side back row because typically they're going to be stronger at playing back row than your right side. For these example purposes, we're just going to assume that the right side is playing all the way around. Here in our home position for rotation 4, we have the setter in left front, M2 is in middle front, OH2 is in right front, the right side or DS is in right back, libero is in middle back, and our OH1 is in left back. So let's look at what the serve receive formation will look like for rotation 4 in a 5-1. Again, there are a couple different ways that you can set this up, but for this video, we're going to look at what it will look like when the right side is playing all the way around. And usually they will take their right side out of serve receive and hide them so that they don't have to pass. So we're going to pull our OH2 to pass, but we're going to pull them back all the way to left back. Might look weird, but this is still a legal formation because the OH2 is still on the right side of both of the other front row players, which is the middle and the setter. As long as they are in front of the OH1 and the libero and the right side, it's still legal because, again, they are in front of our back row players. This setup makes it a little bit easier for our OH2 to swing out and hit on the outside. Once that ball is passed, our setter can release to setter base, and the middle can release to the middle. And once that ball goes back over the net, everybody goes back to their base position. Now that the setter is front row, their base position is going to be right front. All right, now let's move into rotation 5 for a 5-1. Again, let's look at the home positions first. Everybody has rotated 1 position clockwise. Our OH2 has now moved to the back row, so right side is in middle back, arrow is in left back, OH1 is back to the front in left front, there is in middle front, middle is in right front. Now let's look at how we can set this up in serve receive. Now this is going to look very similar to serve receive rotation 2. The middle is pulled off to the 10-foot line on the right side, and the setter is pushed up to the net. The difference here is that we don't have a right side with our setter. Our OH2, our libero, and our OH1 are pulled back to pass. The right side is pulled back behind our passers to hide them, and overlapping rules still apply. Our OH1 has to be in front of our back row players. Once the ball is passed, OH1 can swing out to the left side of the court to hit on the outside. Middle blocker can come around to the middle and hit in the middle. The setter is just going to release to their setter base, again in the front row. Again, a disclaimer I'm going to keep making in this video is that there are a lot of different serve receive formations that you can do in each of these rotations. I'm going to be breaking down each rotation in depth with all the different serve receive formations that you can do in future videos in this series. Now let's look at rotation 6 serve receive 4 or 5. First, let's look at rotation 6 home positions. Again, everybody everybody is rotated in clockwise fashion. OH1 in middle front, the setter is in right front, the libero is in right back, OH2 is in middle back, and the right side is in left back. Now let's look at our serve-receive formations for rotation 6 for a 5-1. So again, here we're going off of the example that the right side is playing all the way around. So the right side is going to be pulled all the way back and hidden in serve-receive. We're going to pull back our OH1 to pass alongside our OH2 and our libero. Again, the overlapping rules still apply, so our OH1 has to be on the right side of our middle, and the right side in the back row has to be on the left side of OH2. It makes it easier just to have our right side in between OH1 and OH2. The setter, since they are in right front, they can just stay in right front, so this is honestly the easiest rotation for setters. So once that ball is passed, the outside is going to shift out to the left side to hit, the middle is going to come into the middle. Again, the setter is already in their setter base position. Once that ball goes back over the net, everybody goes back to their base positions. So there you have it. That's going to be all 6 rotations for both a 5-1 and a 6-2, specifically for serve receive. In the next videos, we're going to be doing a deep dive into each rotation and each rotation serve receive formations. We're going to go over the advantages, the disadvantages, what plays to run in each rotation, over just some commonly asked questions in each rotation. If you thought this video was helpful, make sure to give it a like and make sure to comment down below any questions you have about rotations. Also, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next video in this series. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.